Good day, and welcome virtually to the Canada School of Public Service. My name is Justin Ford, and I'm an analyst at the Canada School of Public Service within the Respectful and Inclusive Workplace business line. Bienvenue à cet événement virtuel de l'École de la...
Welcome to this virtual conference of the School of Public Works.
Acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. For those who are not on this land, I invite you to take a moment to recognize the land that you gather on. I would also like to take a moment to let you know that Kenza Bouchard, our originally slotted moderator, will not be able to join us today, which is why I am here. I am very pleased to introduce today's event, entitled Respect Day 2020, Primer on Black Lives Matter, Anti-Racism and Discrimination, and Unconscious Bias. This event is part of a series of events that the school is developing with the Federal Black Employee Caucus. I have the great pleasure to be joined by a group of speakers who have knowledge and experience on the topic, and I am sure the discussion promises to be inspiring. On behalf of the school, I would like to welcome all participants to this event. Tout d'abord, commençons par...
First of all, let's start with some general information.
Webcast itself. If you require to use the service by telephone, please refer to the email you received that contained the webcast link. You can find the information on how to connect. To make your viewing experience better, we encourage you to disconnect from the VPN if possible and reconnect to the event. Throughout the event, you may submit your questions, and we hope you will do so. You have two ways, either by clicking on the icon that looks like a raised hand on the webcast, or you can go to www.wooclap.com and enter the code SEP21, that's SEP21, to submit your questions. I think the information is being displayed on the screen now. There is someone monitoring the inbox and will submit the questions to the panelists. Lastly, these conversations can be emotional for some people, so I encourage you to take care of yourself and your mental health. Take a break if you need to, or reach out to resources such as the Employee Assistance Program. Well, let's get started. So we have numerous panelists with us today, and one of them is currently trying to join in. But with us already, we have Alex and David, who are both going to be here to speak of their experiences. The event today refers to the National Respect Day celebrated every year internationally on September 18th. This celebration is all about promoting respect, preventing discrimination and violence, and inclusive and diverse work teams. And that should obviously be a priority 365 days of the year. But still, this gives us the opportunity to discuss, reflect, and exchange about matters, challenges, and issues considered as priorities to ensure our workplaces are respectful, healthy, and inclusive, and that our workforces, teams, work well together, are able to better connect and deliver not only efficiently, but feel that they are truly respected, engaged, and motivated. Now, with the issue of anti-Black racism that is currently dominating the news coverage around the world, we want to focus the angle of Respect Day on discussions surrounding anti-Black racism, the Black Lives Matter movement, discrimination, and unconscious bias. We want to provide you with a forum where we can all come together and learn, educate ourselves, and be more aware and have the opportunity to ask questions. Our goal is to have an open, honest, and safe conversation. We want to have this be a safe space for you to ask the questions that are lingering in the back of your mind, and you are perhaps nervous to ask colleagues or friends. So to begin, it is my great pleasure to introduce the first of our speakers, Alex. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Justin, and good afternoon to everyone who's taken the time to participate in this event. I want to thank the School of Public Service for actually conducting this event. I think it's great. The team has been helpful. They've gone through a lot today, quite frankly, but watching them over the past few weeks and their excitement has been something. I've been sort of quietly, but watching them, and I think it's been impressive. And we've gone through a lot today, but hey, listen, we're here now, and let's just have an open conversation. So I'm going to start off by just giving a little bit of my background, just so you know who the speaker is. So, as Justin talked about earlier, I'm a lawyer with the Department of Justice. So I've been practicing law for about approximately 22 years now. My field of expertise, and I've been certified by the Law Society of Ontario, is in environmental law. So I advise the government on various matters dealing with, I don't know, habitat, dealing with licensing, regulatory law on how the environment is impacted, and give me advice on how that's to be done properly. So that's my professional background. I also teach at the University of Ottawa. I'm a law prof there. I've been doing that approximately about, I'd say about 6 years, 7 years.
Thank you.
And I've also been a board member. So I'm currently a board member of Canadian Association of Black Lawyers. That's the Ottawa division. I'm a director with that. And I'm also a director with another environmental organization, Learning for a Sustainable Future. So that's my bio. The topics today, I've been sort of waiting to talk about this. It's for me, it's personal. I have 2 young daughters. So watching their growth and watching how they're sort of becoming cognizant of the issue is quite something. To share with you some facts, my oldest daughter is 11 years old. And recently she does some emojis, right? And she did one recently, just as any other day, but this one was sort of special. She drew an emoji, and I think it depicts someone like herself. And it's someone wearing a mask, so it's sort of speaking of the times we're in. And the T-shirt says equality. And if you look very closely, the eyes of the emoji has hearts in it. So even an 11-year-old, and I did not tell her to draw this emoji, but she's aware of conversations. She's aware of her environment and what's going on. So if an 11-year-old can get it to talk about equality for all, I think it's something that we can all pay attention to and try and deal with it as someone like herself makes her way through. We talk about Black Lives Matter, and for most of you, you've probably had some kind of conversation about it, whether it's the importance of it or whether it's trying to figure out, well, what is this Black Lives Matter or all lives matter? It really depends. There's always a spectrum of opinions when dealing with something where you have opinions, and that's okay. That's what we're here to do, is to talk about these opinions and try to figure them out. The one thing I've learned working in environmental law, a lot of my clients are scientists. So the one thing they've taught me, which I think is applicable today, is that they always start with a baseline. They always start with a baseline. You're probably asking, what does that mean? They want to know the historical context before they move on and do their projections. So they go into the field and try to see what is the history of the environment that they're entering into before they make changes. When dealing with Black Lives Matter, this is my opinion, you're going to get individuals that understand the history, but don't really care. So you're gonna get that. So let's just put that aside. You're gonna get individuals that I don't think fully understand the history, and they're gonna be like, well, all lives matter. And then you're gonna get some that understand the full historical context of Black people in the Americas, understand the history fully, and want to do something about it. Really, again, it's a spectrum. Okay, but I attended a similar event as we're doing today last year, and it was during Black History Month. And the event was put on by a government department, and it was really good intentions. Okay, again, a safe space. Let's talk about these issues, see how we're doing together. One of the senior officials that started off the event talked about slavery, and this is the start of the event, but said that slavery, at least in Canada, slavery didn't exist. So it kind of started the event off in a very, in the wrong way. Because again, if we talk about Black Lives Matter, we talk about the legacy. So we have to talk about slavery. We've had slavery in Canada since the 1600s, and it ended in 1834 by a British proclamation. Those are the facts. In fact, if you look back at the history books, we had anti-slavery bills passed in Ontario in the late 1700s. So in order to pass an anti-slavery bill, you have to have slavery. Again, Black Lives Matter, you need to understand the legacy, why people are talking about Black Lives Matter. Let's progress. Slavery, abolition, 1834, then we move to segregation and then desegregation. Let's stop there for a second. Segregation is a very interesting point in history because slavery is over. We're talking the 1940s, 30s, 50s. Why do I say it's interesting? My father went to school in the States. He did his PhD, University of Michigan, and then went to UT for law school. But this was before the end of the Second World War. So just think of it. He's in the States. I think he, at one point, went and taught summer school, late 1940s in Georgia. Why? Because he wanted to actually see it for his own eyes, where a real society operated on a daily basis on a very segregated system. So I'm still alive, and I'm a descendant of my dad who saw that. So you think of it, the individuals who are enforcing those lives, their children are still alive just as I am before you. So the legacy of segregation, Black Lives Matter, this stuff is all interlinked. That's what, again, I don't think we fully appreciate. So let's move forward. I don't want to take all the time in my opening, but if we move forward, we desegregate, civil rights comes in. We're in roughly the 1960s. And then from the civil rights movement all the way up to modern day, human rights legislation is passed federally and provincially, and we're talking about anti-discrimination laws. So now we're using laws to not only segregate, allow for it, but we're using laws to prevent for discrimination. And that's what we call, in my opinion, the tolerant period in which we are in today. But the question, which I think we'll get into, and I'm going to end on this, is a tolerant period the end of history? The end of history as we apply it to race? In my humble opinion, it's not. Going forward, what is the next chapter? And this is something I've been thinking about quite a bit. To me, is cultural transcendence. And I think it's not a new topic. And if you study Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream speech, he talked about his 4 little children. He talked about those children being judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. How does someone do that? That we're human beings. We have vices. Well, that person is able to do it because they're transcendent in nature. They can step out of their body and judge something not based on the conditions which they may have been molded by. That's a transcendent individual. And we've seen examples of that when Nelson Mandela, when he took power in the mid-1994, when he was coming out of apartheid. Now, how do you deal with a nation where you have the group of blacks and the group of whites didn't like each other based on the system that they had been living? Okay, so I'll just leave it at that for now. I'm looking forward to this talk, very excited. So I'll pass it over to Justin.
Well, thank you so much, Alex. Those were some very powerful words. And as a father myself, watching how my daughter is trying to make sense of what's going on it's a humbling experience, to be honest. So thank you very much. And now to our next guest. So hello, Heather. Heather joins us today. She came in a little late, but I will let her give her own bio. The floor is yours, Heather.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for your patience. I've had a little fun with our technology today, as I'm sure we're all experiencing over the past number of months where we're so much more dependent on it. First of all, I just want to say thank you to everybody for coming. I know as public servants, we are all very busy people, and this is a good chunk of your day. So I do appreciate you taking that kind of time and making that commitment. It's a good sign that we've had so many people take the time to be with us today. I want to take a moment and just acknowledge my parents. I always tell people I would like you to know who I am. I was born and raised in Canada, born and raised in Edmonton, to two fantastic parents who have really need to take credit for pretty much every useful thing I have ever done. I am delighted to tell you my mom is listening today, so my little shout out for her, very proud of her. And I'll jump into what I have to talk about. We have a question up for you guys to take a look at. I'm not sure if we got did we get a chance to explain how the polls work? I'm seeing nods, so I'm going to go with that. So the question to you is, how many Canadians admit they sometimes think racist thoughts, but wouldn't talk about them in public? So you've got your choices up there. Go on up and pick an answer. Is it 11%? Is it 26%? Is it 35%? Is it 49%? What do you think? How many Canadians say, I think racist thoughts, but I wouldn't talk about them in public? So I'll leave that one up for a little while so you can answer that, and I'm just going to tell you what I think on the subject. I guess the most important point you need to come away with today, or that I'm hoping everyone comes away with today, is an understanding that racism is real. As Alex mentioned, there's sometimes a perception that, yes, racism is terrible. Good thing it doesn't exist in Canada. And that, of course, is just simply a myth. It's not an American problem. It's not a historic problem. It's not an isolated problem. It's not a few bad apples. It is a huge systemic problem that exists in Canada. And it's very important for people to be aware of that. I think that one of our challenges is people think it's a solved problem and therefore don't pay any attention to it. But it's just not in question. There's so much evidence. There's so much academic research. We know that it exists in healthcare. We know it exists in criminal justice. We know it exists in workplaces. We know it exists in the public service. We see it every time we run the public service employee survey. It really, honestly, for people who are saying racism doesn't exist in Canada, you're placing yourself in the group of people who believe that the earth is flat and that, Elvis is alive and well in a bunker hidden by the government. There's really just no question. It's not in dispute anymore. We know that racism exists. So I would just really encourage you to inform yourself and sort of start your thought process with that understanding that it is a real issue that exists for Canadians, for people of color, and for Black Canadians in particular. I think some of our challenges is that people don't know what racism looks like. They're looking for, angry rednecks burning crosses on lawns. Well, I'm sorry to report that we do have that in Canada. We do have active, simple hatred. I can tell you a story of driving down a road in Edmonton, minding my own business, when a driver next to me signaled to get my attention. I pulled up at a light, I wound down my window, and out spewed just total hatred, you effing N-word, blankety what's it, for no reason that I could tell. Just I happened to be driving by, and I happened to be a Black woman. What stuck with me in that speech is that the end of that speech was, why don't you go back where you came from? Well, as it happens, I was driving in front of the Royal Oaks Hospital, which is actually where I was born. I was literally not 100 yards from the spot where I was born. It's very painful to me as a Canadian who came into the world and sort of grew with an expectation just like yours that I would be treated fairly and equally, to experience that kind of active hatred. But it exists, it's out there. Racism also looks like simple bias, people making, racist assumptions, taking one look at me and thinking that they know who I am. I think of a police officer who pulled me over. The reason he pulled me over, according to him, is that I had an out-of-province license plate. This is in Ottawa. Those of you who live in Ottawa know that an out-of-province license plate is barely of interest, right? Half of the people are living in Gatineau, the other half are in Quebec, but, in Ottawa, what's the big deal? But that's the reason I was pulled over. And I was pulled over. The officer's first question is, whose car are you driving? I am driving a nice car. It must be someone else's car. The presumption, of course, is that I've stolen the car, and that's why I'm in this nice car. The second question from the officer is, when's the last time that you were arrested? These are the kinds of direct bias that we see and that we experience. And then there's what we call microaggressions. The little small, you could call them mosquito bites, that are small things. But for us, for people of color, it's a bit like death by 1,000 cuts, because it happens to you a dozen times a day. It's you are sort of constantly dealing with these little nips and bites. And you know, I'm reminded of a role where I was serving as executive director, and my office was the door open such that I could see all the way down a long hallway. And I saw this man sort of wandering around looking lost. Got up and I said, "Excuse me, can I help you?" And he sort of looked me up and down and said, "No, you can't help me. I'm looking for the executive director." I was the executive director. Why would he think that I wasn't? Why wouldn't he simply ask who it was? And these are difficult moments. Now, in that particular situation, my response was, "Well, best of luck to you." And I went back to my office. After a few minutes, I took pity on him and came back and I said, "Are you still looking for the executive director?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "How will you know when you find her?" And we stood in silence for a few minutes. When he said, "Are you the executive director?" I was able to say, "Yes, I am." These are the little sort of nips and bites that people deal with every day. Constantly being asked, "Where are you from?" No, "Where are you from?" Because of course I couldn't possibly be a real Canadian. Those are things I'm asked all the time. There's assumptions about my education. There's assumption about my background. So I have people who say, "Wow, your English is so good. You're so articulate," right? Why wouldn't I be articulate? At the time, I was the head of communications for a major organization. Why wouldn't I? Why would that be surprising for anybody? But it's things like this that just you are facing over and over and over, that happen to you all the time. I could tell you even just a couple of weeks ago, going into a store, I'm looking for this particular product. "Oh, no, we don't have it." It's really, how do you not have this? Is this something you carry all the time? You don't have this in any size, any brand? No, we don't have it. And as I sort of stood there thinking, boy, that's strange. Then the clerk said, "Well, we have it, but it's very expensive." Yeah, thanks, right? Managing my budget for me because, of course, I need that assistance. I think these things, when they happen to you over and over, it's wearing. It's mentally wearing. It's emotionally wearing. And then, when it happens to you for the 1,000th time of the day and people react strongly, folks around you, what's the matter with her? I mean, what's the big deal if someone asks you where you're from? They don't know that it's the 1,000th mosquito bite that you've had that day, that week, that month, that year, and how wearing it is. So it's microaggressions like that that are also part of the problem. So if you are not a person of color, why aren't you seeing that? Why would you know that? It's not part of your experience. This is what we mean when we talk about the issue of white privilege. What does that mean? Basically, what white privilege means is that if you came into the world as a white person, you're having a different experience than me. You're in the VIP lane in many, many ways. And you're not even going to know you're in the VIP lane because that's as far as you know, that's the only lane there is. You're not seeing anybody who's experiencing it differently, and we accept the world as it is presented to us. So why would you know that? It's important to realize that you cannot see your own privilege. None of us can. It's become part of the woodwork to you, and you're not going to notice it, and you almost can't notice it without a conscious effort to do so. One of the great example of this that I love to tell people is the same thing exists when you look at set aside race and look at gender. So my sister told me about a conference she attended where the speaker said, for the men in the office, and let me put this question to you. What are you doing on a daily basis to avoid being assaulted? Just spit out a list of what you're doing on a regular basis to avoid being assaulted. And then there was a very long pause, a very long silence. Most of the men in the room are confused by the question. Women, on the other hand, could answer that question easily. I don't walk alone in the dark. I don't listen to headphones when I'm by myself. I call someone. I don't get into a car with someone I don't know. I don't leave a drink unattended. I walk with my keys in my hand. Women were easily able to rattle off a list a yard long. That's part of the experience of being female in our society. It's a privilege that most men have and have no idea they have. To get up, go for a walk, live a peaceful life. They're not walking through the world worrying about being assaulted at any given moment. The same is true when it comes down to race. We are not, as people of color, as Black people in this country, having the same experience as you. We are living a different kind of world. We're facing a different situation, facing situations on a day-to-day basis that if you are white, you're not going to see them because they don't happen to you. That doesn't make you a horrible person. It just means that you're someone who's having a different experience in the world, and you just really need to be aware of it, that you can't look around and say, well, I've never seen it, so it doesn't exist. You've never seen it because it doesn't happen to you. You may not have seen it because it's not part of your experience. If you're a civilized human being who hangs out with other civilized human beings, you may never hear overt racism and you may never directly see it because it's not going to be part of your world. This is a really hard question. And part of the reason I brought this forward is because it is a hard question. It's a difficult one for people to talk about. And it's usually pretty devastating for people when they begin to understand it exists. One of my dearest friends, who's been a friend of mine for over 40 years since we were little girls, we were traveling together. We were going on a trip together, and she said, I'm going to book the accommodations. And at one point she said to me, I'd like to book us at bed and breakfasts instead of hotels. Is that okay? And I said, yes, but you have to tell them I'm Black when you're booking at the bed and breakfast. And she's confused. Why would I do this? So because a bed and breakfast is typically someone's home. And I don't want to arrive at someone's home and discover that I'm not welcome. I don't want to get there and discover that my reservation has magically disappeared, which unfortunately is experience that's happened to me right here in Canada. And I don't want to be in someone's home and feel like I'm in a hostile environment. So you can book us in bed and breakfast, but when you book, you have to tell them that you're traveling with a Black woman. And she told me later she actually cried. She was so upset over that because it just was not something that had entered into her own head or thoughts, or something that she would never, ever consider as a white woman. It's just not part of her experience. It's difficult to think about. It's stressful, and people will often say, well, I'm a good person, so I can't have racist thoughts. Canada is a great country, so there can't be racism in it. Right? So clearly you're mistaken. It's just a few bad apples. It's sort of isolated in this. And I think part of the problem, and this is what we would call white fragility, it has to do with the way that we divide people in our country into separate piles. There's two kinds of people: evil, horrible, Nazi racists, and nice people. Right? So if that's the way that you sort the world, then you have to land in the pile of nice people. And that means you have to reject the idea that racism exists, that you could have any part in it, that you could have any role in it. And so you'll get people being very defensive. I'm not a racist. Lots of my friends are Black people. I've never seen any racism. You must have a chip on your shoulder, right? Canada is a great country. I've actually had people say that to me. I love this country. And if you don't love this, you shouldn't live here. What does that have to do with anything? Canada is a great country, but that doesn't mean as Canadians we can't look and see its flaws and say this is an area I'd like to see some improvement. So as we talk through this issue today, I just would ask you, if you're not part of the Black population and people of color, to just give some thought to those 2 points: that you're experiencing a privilege that you cannot see, and that you can accept the existence of racism. You can see racism and be aware of racism, and it doesn't mean that you're a horrific person, you're a bad person, there's something wrong with you. And if you can set aside that defensiveness, if you can set aside that dismissiveness, and just, I guess, come forward with two points with a bit of humility, understanding that there's a chance you may not understand that experience, and maybe vigilance. Because if you're raised in Western society, believe me when I tell you, you have racist views. I have racist views. I'm sure if you spend enough time in Canada or any Western country, you also have racist views. It's impossible for you to avoid. So it just means you need to take an extra step, as we all do, and say, let me just question my own motives there. Why? What am I thinking, and why am I thinking it? And could there be something else going on there that maybe isn't immediately apparent to me that I need to consider? So I see you guys have answered your question. Just circling back to, is there racism in this country? And you guys are wiser than I thought. That is the correct answer. 49% of Canadians say, I sometimes think racist thoughts, but I would never say them. I wouldn't talk about them in public. I suspect that is a deeply underreported number, even though it's an anonymous survey, for exactly the reasons that I've just listed for you. People are really challenged to say, can I be a good person and also have racist thoughts? Can I be a good person and not have been part of correcting issues of race in this country and reconciling those two things? I think what has happened is that Black Lives Matter is emerging from the convergence of these 3 points. Racism exists. We know that it exists. There is a certain amount of white privilege that prevents people from seeing it. It's sort of exacerbated by the fact that what we would call white fragility, by the painfulness of having to acknowledge a role in the problem that is so difficult for people. And then from this arises the Black Lives Matter movement, which basically says, as a Black community, we're not prepared to suffer and potentially even to die while the rest of the country wrestles with those 3 points. As Alex has pointed out, it's been 400 years and nobody's prepared to wait anymore. It's time for action. It's time for something positive to happen. And what's emerging from that are great conversations like this one. And I'm hoping that here today will be a forum of real openness where we can talk about questions. There are no dumb questions. Please be open in putting those forward on the table. And I'm hoping that we will all come away with knowing a little bit more than we had when we began. And I'll stop talking and throw to David.
Thank you so much, Heather. That was fantastic. You were talking about it, and I suggest anyone who wants to learn and read more and really, assess what you're experiencing and what you're doing internally, I recommend it highly. It's a fantastic read, and it's all about learning, right, and challenging it. So maintenant, notre troisième panéliste, David Nelson.
Our third panelist, David Nelson. Thank you very much, Justin, and thank you all. I would like to thank the school and also the caucus of Black federal employees. I want to thank the panelists who have spoken before me on this subject matter. It's a privilege for me to be part of the panelists and to be able to speak to you. So thank you again. Allow me to give you an idea of who I am and what I do to express my point of view of this matter. I am David Nelson. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm also an employee of the federal government working in Montreal. My story is very similar to that of many of you. I came here as a student. I worked in a variety of departments in Canada, citizenship and immigration, amongst others. And I can say that I've had a variety of professional experience in the public service. That at my early positions, and I had to experience a great deal before I reached the position that I presently occupy. I can say that the reason that I was really motivated to discuss with you today was the subject of Black Lives Matter. Why is it so important to discuss this subject? It's quite simply this. is because the accent is being put on a social problem where collectively a community is asking for social change. And this is the entire population, the population of a group that is saying that the present situation is unacceptable. They are saying that Black Lives Matter. And in so doing, they are allowing all of us to become agents of change agents that will be able to improve the situation. This being said, Black Lives Matter is a movement that was born in the United States in 2013. Lives is used because it refers to Black people who have been killed there in the United States and also in Canada simply because of their skin color. Once I was driving and I was stopped by the police. Why? Because I wasn't driving fast enough. I really wasn't driving fast enough. I was going 100 kilometers an hour. That was the speed limit. But some people might think that Black People Matter should be replacing the Black Lives Matter statement. But really, the situation of Black people in Canada, the United States, and elsewhere is extremely difficult. Thank you so much, David. Thank you.
That we had our next poll up, and the question was, what is the portion of non-Black Canadians who believe that discrimination against Black people is no longer a problem? Well, Heather, will I let you tell the viewers the right answer?
Now I feel like I'm being tested, but I believe that fourth answer is the correct answer. What's interesting to me in looking at that is that most people admit that they themselves think racist thoughts, but a larger percentage think that racism is a solved problem. So I think racist thoughts, but I must be alone. Maybe nobody else does. And I think that's a really telling question. I think that rolls into something else here, because I see we've had a question about whether racism can be exercised by racialized people. If you're okay, Justin, I'll take that question and give it an answer. So the question is, can racism be exercised by those who are themselves racialized? Can Black people be racist against other races? And in short, is that possible? That's a bit of a challenging question. When we talk about racism, I think there's two elements to it. There's bias, unconscious bias. Can you hold thoughts that are perhaps unfair thoughts against other races? And I would say absolutely. That's a human failing. It's not a failing that is unique to any one race. I think it's entirely possible for any race to be biased against other races, for races to be biased against themselves, unfortunately, as part of this society. But when we talk about racism and what racism looks like in society, racism is about the exercise of power. It's about using power to hold minority groups into a subservient position. You cannot exercise, you don't have the power to do that when you yourself are in the subservient position. So can anyone hold a racist view? Can anyone hold a kind of biased view? The answer I would say is of course. Can racialized groups exercise racism, practice racism? I'm going to say no, because it implies power. We as a minority group don't have the power to oppress the larger group that is in society. We don't, if we had that power, then we wouldn't be having this kind of conversation. So I think we have to, when we're looking at that question, separate maybe the attitudes and the thought processes from the ability to act and exercise that kind of power that underlies racism. The other thing that I would add to this, and we see this a lot, and if any of you are familiar with the experiment Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes, And we see it in examples in places like South Africa that are sort of overcoming a racist past. People who have themselves been in the position of being oppressed are remember what it felt like. So they are much less likely to, given the opportunity, behave the same way against others. It's a bit similar to what we see when we look at the most generous donors. For example, when we look at the most generous donations to charity, they typically come from people who are themselves disadvantaged. So the lower your income, the higher percentage of your income you actually contribute to charity. It's because they've been there. They know what it's like. They know what it feels like. So is it possible? Sure. It's not very likely because, again, they bring their own experience. When you look at the experience, blue eyes, brown eyes, if you're, for those who aren't familiar, just quickly, it's an experience where they pull out all the blue-eyed people, say you're special, you get all these extra rights, and sort of let that unfold, and sort of anti-blue-eyed racism immediately develops, and then they go forward and say, whoops, made a mistake, it's actually the other way. It's actually the brown-eyed people who are the special people. The fear always when the situation is reversed is, oh no, now it's our turn and we're going to get nailed. But it's seldom as severe when the switch is made, because the people who are sort of now suddenly been put into the higher position have that memory of what it was like and the suffering of what that was. So it seldom occurs in the same kind of way.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think this is an opportune time to remind the audience that we're here to answer your questions. So feel free to submit them. Again, you can click on the icon on the webcast and submit a question that way, or by logging into www.wooclap.com with the handle SEP21. That's SEP21. So originally, as the event was supposed to unroll, I had my colleague Kenza, who was going to be here to speak about unconscious bias. And by no means am I an expert on unconscious bias. By no means do I feel that I can take the space to speak of it, other than my own personal experiences. And at the school, we are developing a lot of training on unconscious bias. There already exists. And I suggest all of you to take the time to take these courses, because they are illuminating. And they do make you reflect in ways that you usually wouldn't. I was raised in a multicultural neighborhood in Montreal. I was an Anglophone within Quebec. I had parents who, grew up in the 60s and 70s and had an open and honest worldview. But even I've had to check myself and look inside and see the things that were built up by the environment with which I grew, by the way I experienced the world as a white privileged man. Please take the time. It's worthwhile experience, and it really, don't close yourself off to what you find out, I guess, is the one thing I can say to that. So again, feel free to go to the school's website. We have lots of resources and training on unconscious bias, and I'm sure a lot of it will come up during today's discussion. On that note, let's turn to today's discussion. So the questions are rolling in, but the first one I think I want to put forward, and David, toi t'as parlé de ça un tout petit peu avant.
David, you talked about this a little earlier.
From very well-meaning people is, but don't all lives matter? Aren't we all, trying to find that one united world? So why is it important to not say all lives matter and to stick with Black Lives Matter? So I'll give you each a moment to discuss. Maybe Alex, we'll let you start off on this.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for that. Yeah, it's a topic which I think most people know all lives matter. I don't think anyone will debate that. I think as a human being and understanding the basic rights for each and every person on this earth that you're born with are called human rights. And I think there's an understanding behind that all lives matter. That's not the debate. And that's why in my introduction, I wanted to kind of go through a very historical context of what the legacy is of relations with Black people in the Americas. That includes Canada and the United States. So when you have a group of people like like Black people that were introduced to Canada and the United States, and quite frankly, as subhuman, because the way they were treated and the way in which Black people were used, it was really subhuman if we were looking at that today. If we had a mechanism legally of slavery, those people would be considered subhuman. So you look back at it and you'd say, how did people even survive that? So when we're talking about all lives matter in this debate, I think it comes from either a space where the people have no concept, that's meaning no historical context, or don't want to understand the historical context of Black people, or quite frankly, and this happens, people don't want to share spaces. Like, if we're honest with ourselves, it's difficult to give up something you have, especially if it's working to your advantage. Like, one of the biggest things to do is to compromise. Countries have problems. We fight wars over that, quite frankly. So if it means that Black people are more brought into this more accepted state, well, there is a compromise. When I went to law school, in Dalhousie Law School, my first year was 94. Previous to that, quite frankly, there wasn't that many Black graduates. And there was a report that was issued that stated, you're going to have to start admitting Black students and Aboriginal students. First thing you get is, they need to be qualified, they need to be this, they need to be that. Well, we can find them, which they did. So there had to be a push in order to say, well, these individuals are entitled, their lives matter too, and their communities need lawyers and doctors and so forth. Guess what? They started admitting Black lawyers. Now today, there's judges, politicians, we're working in all fields, contributing to society, not just our communities, but to contributing to society, right? Same thing with med school. My brother went through that process. He's a doctor today, an orthopedic surgeon in Barrie, Ontario. So the concept of all lives matter, we can say it till we're blue in the face. I don't think anyone's debating that. I think what we're trying to say, and it's not going anywhere, is that until Black people are treated equally and given their chance and afforded their human rights, basic human rights, and are considered equals to the system, we do have to focus on their lives. Again, it's an internal thing. It's not something that Black people can even shut off, even if we wanted to. Because if you really study, the thymos of each person, which means our inner self and the need for recognition, the need for dignity, these are the things that we're fighting for. We can't even shut that off if we wanted to. So if you have an unbalanced system where we're every day looking in the media and there's a target and there's an oppressed persons, well, of course, they're going to rise up and say, well, our lives matter too. Those three little words, very powerful, very direct, and very necessary. Thanks.
Can I jump in on that one, Justin?
Please do, Heather.
I have to say, I hear that all the time, and I hear it said by people who really have no idea what they're saying when they say it. Ultimately, I would say, for me, simply, you're diminishing my experience when you say that. Saying that all lives matter implies that you think all of us are on the same playing field. We're all equal, we're all the same, all our lives matter. That's a lovely and idealistic view, but we know that that is not the reality. My life does not matter as much as yours in this society, and we can demonstrate that statistically as well as by my own lived experience. So when someone comes forward and says, well, all lives matter, basically you're saying is, I don't see that you have a different experience. I don't care that you're having a different and lesser than experience. And I think that everybody should just be treated the same. Well, let's talk about being treated the same. When we talk about being treated the same, we want equity of outcomes. Not the equity of input, but equity of outcomes. There's a wonderful, wonderful graphic that I'm hoping you have all seen, but it's people of three different heights who are all trying to look over a fence at an event. A short person, an average height, and a tall person. We don't say everybody gets the same size step ladder, right? Because that doesn't help. You need a person according to what they need. It's not about giving everyone the same. It's about giving everybody what they need. It's also, I have to say, you're going to hear some irritation from people when you say that, and I'll tell you part of what it is. Is sort of, when did we wake up and discover that everybody needs to be treated the same? And I want you to sort of visualize this experience. We have Lucky Louie and we have disadvantaged Diane, right? So Lucky Louie gets a better education, and he gets to live in a better neighborhood, and he gets a better job, and he gets all of the promotions, and he gets a loan at the bank when he applies for it, and he gets judged based on what he brings into the world. He's having a great experience. Over here we have disadvantaged Diane, who's getting none of those things. Diane puts her hand up and says, wait a minute, what about me? And then society looks around and says, you know what? Starting right now, no one gets any extra privileges. We're all going to get treated the same. But there's a problem. We're not taking back Lucky Louie's education. We're not taking back his promotion. We're not taking back all of those. So it's basically akin to saying, now that we have doled out all of the privileges, we've decided that now we're going to be treating everyone the same. We're going to have to tip the scales a little in order to make things equal, because we're not starting from a point of equality. So you can't now take an unequal system and lay out equal bonus benefits in that system, because some people are already starting. As again, we've given half of the society, or a good chunk of the society. Now that we've given you a massive head start, now we're going to impose a merit system from this point forward. I think that maybe speaks to the question someone else asked about, what about employment equity initiatives or posters, job posters, where we see we're encouraging Black applicants, where that's about rebalancing that scale and about not trying to lay equality onto an uneven surface. If you built a crooked foundation, you can't now build a sound house on that crooked foundation and expect the house to be solid. You have to tip that in order to come out level. And that's what the challenge is in saying all lives matter. Let's treat everyone equally from here forward. Don't need employment equity. It starts with a presumption that what we have now is equal in the first place.
Right, thank you so much. I mean, that's exactly it. David, je sais que vous avez des pensées.
David, you want to say something, David? I must say that we are in the International Decade of Equality, and we want to be able to provide advocacy for this decade of Black lives.
Lives matter. Et c'est là que le problème. Mon objectif aujourd'hui, bien entendu, c'est démontrer pourquoi on.
And I ask you this question. We're not asking, as Black Lives Matter, to be superior to the others. We want to be able to grow on what we have, on the opportunities that we have. You will understood that what we want is something that is fair, that is just for Black people. And this I can express in terms of jobs, of programs, and so on. Very often, some of these programs that already exist have a negative effect on Black employees. This is why here in the Black Federal Employees Caucus, we're very cognizant of that. We want to be able to work to provide disaggregated facts on this type of thing. The caucus, we feel, must press the government to fulfill its obligations by providing programs, providing for all communities, for unions, and all employees as well. Black Lives Matter. Is it because the institutional system that exists now is disadvantageous to Black people? there is a great deal of baggage, a great deal of what's been done in the past that has prevented Black people from getting into the higher echelons of the hierarchy. And this is something that reverberates in other cultures. For example, there are fewer Black people in universities, fewer professors, less a physical presence of Black people in a variety of areas in society, in the media, on boards of administration. Black people are almost absent. And a number of things have been done over the past years to promote Black people, but they are nonetheless still vulnerable in the federal government to discrimination. And I can say that the fact that this process is being set in place for Black people, is it advantageous really? Or does it disadvantage people of other cultures, no matter what the strategy that is being put in place? Well, I remember when I first came into the public service at the federal level, they were emphasizing young public servants. They wanted young people to enter the public service, and rather than, and they wanted to get rid of some of the older people who were there for quite some time. So the notion then was to go out and bring in young people, and the intent was to rejuvenate the public service, give it a younger face, and give certain advantages to them, career opportunities. Then it was woman in terms of people said no. What can happen today if people have to go, if women have to go into the job market, who's going to be able to take care of our children? But I would like to say that the Black Lives Matter movement is a social movement. It's not to discriminate against the group, but it is rather to ask people who have been able to enjoy privilege to open their eyes and to improve the system.
Now, the system we're working right now has using uneven criteria to evaluate people. People who make a decision are still going to find a way to say, well, such a candidate, for whatever reason, should not be included. I'm going to stop there, but I would have other examples that I could very well give you. Well, thank you. And we organized an event with Richard, and he said, as a society, if we make an effort to support and people who need help, everybody will benefit. So, and that's something that really resonated with him, something he said that really resonated with him. I heard what he was saying, and that's exactly what you're saying, essentially, is that we have to help the underprivileged and the disadvantaged.
So I'm going to try not to delay, and if we can all give our most bullet point and hard-hitting answers, but I love this one that just came up is, what if it's uncomfortable to talk to a colleague about race? What do? Comme s'il est inconfortable de parler de la...
If it's uncomfortable for you to discuss racism with your colleague, what can you do?
First, allez-y, David.
Je pense que nous notre collègue, hein.
You can all hear me? I think racism exists, and so we can't deny history. We can't say that it doesn't exist based on the fact that it's what we heard earlier with the statistics is that one person out of two has racist thoughts or biases, but doesn't wish to talk about them in public. Well, in fact, that's ignoring reality. So it's important to talk about it, but the way to do it is that's a different story. So why are you coming to talk to me about racism? Is because you would like to improve your situation? Because when you went to school, your parents and your teachers didn't, in fact, did not give you a proper education, and you would like to know more and understand better? I'll give you a very simple example. There are a lot of expressions that are still being used today that have where the word black is used, but they're very pejorative. For example, if somebody's speaking and they come out with an expression like to denigrate, for example, denigrate. Well, that's a word, that's a racist word because it comes from the word Negro, or to blacken somebody's reputation or diminish the value of a situation. So that's a racist expression, and I could explain to somebody that that's why it's racist, because the word black is always associated with something that is of lesser value or of negative value. So you have to be careful of the words you use. For example, that would be an example. Alex.
Yeah, I mean, discussing these issues are difficult because I think you're talking about legacies that are not people aren't proud of. So whenever you get into those conversations, obviously it's difficult to have a conversation. I think my opinion, what I would put forward, is that you can't have this conversation with everyone. That is a fact. I don't think some people aren't ready for it. They will run for the hills, as I refer to it. So I think when you want to have these conversations, it depends on what the conversation is about. Is it about, oh, this happened to me, or need to make changes in our workplace, or I'm uncomfortable about this person? So it really depends on the questions itself. Normally, I would trust the people that are joining us today. They have a pretty good judgment of character. And if you're in a position where you're having difficulty and you believe there's microaggressions or there's a racial component to why you're being treated the way you are, or just the institution in and of itself, the first thing to do is probably reach out to someone close to you that's outside the organization. I say that only to get sort of a strategic awareness, not to dissuade whether or not it happened or not, but just sort of running it by someone you trust. And then you're going to have to figure out how the organization is set up in order to have that conversation. You have to have it, though. I've had to have done that. I had to do that at one point in my career, and it wasn't easy because you're worried, quite frankly, that there's going to be some kind of reprisal against you. Some of our systems aren't built for this. So, but at the same time, I'm not going to counsel you to say, sit there and deal with it and shut up. I don't think that's good for your mental health. I don't think that's good for your well-being. But the question is strategically, how do you have that conversation in order to make that environment safe for you? Or maybe it's just you want to have a conversation like Black Lives Matter, a general conversation of awareness, which I think is happening more and more. I agree, absolutely. Those conversations should be had, but start with, I think, people that you feel are your allies at work. And if other people are listening to this who can be that ally, well, I suggest that you step up and do so. Because there's no way in which Black people, there's 3 people presenting today, we're not going to solve the issue. We don't have all the answers. This is something that's going to be done hands locked together. So that's part of why I'm here today, is to reach out not only to the people who I feel are having difficulty, but reaching out to individuals who want to contribute and are in a position to do so. So that would be my advice on how to approach an issue and have those difficult discussions that need to occur in the workplace. It really depends on what the questions that's being asked. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. And Heather, you're up next. So I'm going to throw this one at you as well to sort of piggyback it. So on top of how do we have those conversations that are difficult, and I am very fortunate. I work in respectful, inclusive workplace, and we have these conversations often. but it is not the regular here. So not only how do we do it with our colleagues, but how do we ensure that our leaders are held accountable in addressing the systemic racism and discrimination inherent within the federal public service?
I see a few things in there. I think, and we talk about having difficult conversations. These are difficult conversations, as I think you're hearing from my colleagues. These are difficult conversations for people of color, not just for the white people in the room. They are difficult conversations for us as well. As difficult as it is for you, if you're listening to this as a white member of our audience, and I hope you're plentiful. I think if you're hearing this, maybe it's reassuring for you to understand that too. This is not easy for us either. We would walk in and think, well, it would be nice to. Honestly, I'm so sick of this conversation. I'm tired of having it. It needs to be had, but sometimes I'm tired of having it. I had a horrific experience, not horrific, just upsetting, let's say, experience of being in a hardware store recently. And I'm walking through the store and I heard the cashier page someone as I walked in. Please take me off speakerphone, she said, as she paged the guy, whatever. As I'm walking through the store, suddenly this employee appears at my elbow, and he's walking in lockstep with me up and down the hall, and I turn and he's right with me. I got a shadow. And suddenly I realize I am being followed in this store by someone who thinks I'm about to steal something from the hardware store. And I was so shocked that my diplomatic filter shut off, and I just turned and said, "Are you following me?" To which he turned bright red, and we had an interesting conversation, and he sort of slunk away, and I hope sort of has better information about how to refuse such an instruction next time he's at work. But these are hard conversations for everyone. And I think it's fair to say, you know what, this is a hard conversation. I'm not really sure how to say this. I don't know how to raise this. I need your help because I may not phrase this the right way. I'm concerned about this and I don't know if it's an issue. Those are all opening lines that a person of color would appreciate and really respond to. And it's not, I know it feels like a taboo subject, but it's not. I am a Black woman. I am aware that I'm a Black woman. You can say that I'm a Black woman. It's not a mystery to me. It's not upsetting to me. It's not a taboo subject. It's part of who I am, and I need you to see it and recognize that because it speaks to my experience. And it's also your acknowledgement of your understanding that you're not having the same experience as me. I need you to see color. Please don't say you don't see color. I need you to see my color because it is part of my experience. I always tell people saying I don't see color is very much like saying, I didn't even notice you were female. Right? I need you to notice that. It's part of who I am and what my experience is in the world. It's not the only thing, might not even be the most important thing, but it's certainly part of who I am. What does this mean for senior leaders? All senior leaders are accountable for core competencies in the public service. All of us are accountable, I'm saying us as a senior executive, all of us are accountable for making sure we take action, that we are providing a safe workplace, that we're providing one that reflects equity and that is fair and that allows everyone to prosper. That is absolutely a fair question to ask your management. I hope that you are seeing your manager's performance agreements. You should be seeing them. You should be seeing your minister's performance, your mandate letter. You should be looking at that, and it's totally fair when you're in a staff meeting to say, what's our organization doing on this particular issue? Here's a question that I have. I want to see what the update is. Don't forget that as you come to work as an employee, you're also a Canadian. You have a right to that kind of accountability, and just ask that question. What are we? I noticed this was in your agreement, and I'm just wondering what our organization has done on that point. Totally fair, legitimate question for someone to ask.
Fantastic, thank you. David, avez-vous des pensées sur ça?
David, do you have any thoughts on the subject? In the context of the senior leaders' responsibilities. Well, I totally support what my colleague Heather just said, so I'll just leave it at that.
The next question?
No.
So in light of having, the Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, which constitutionally enshrines the protection of everyone in this country, how do institutions such as government departments or the federal public service at large, particularly in service delivery to the public, answer the call from these Black Lives Matter conversations? Comment est-ce que les institutions telles que les ministères...
So how do institutions such as departments and government agencies answer the calls, the call made by Black Lives Matter when it comes to service delivery to the public? Thank you.
Ils font un excellent travail présentement lorsque...
Yes, thank you. That's excellent as a question. Much work is being done in terms of Black Lives Matter in view of the fact that this is a very sensitive subject. The caucus that I represent of Black federal employees is seized with this as well and is working in cooperation with other entities to be able to look further into this in the public service. The promotion of Black employees and so on. But the way, though, I believe that you should address this subject is in answering is racism there and systemic? Is this somebody can take send look at the situation, become aware of the situation, and influence the situation positively, so that it will be a more positive outcome for Black employees.
Have something to say?
I do. I wanted to add that, and I think that we have wonderful policies in place. And I do often encourage my colleagues, people of color, to say, listen, the rules, the laws, the policies are in your favor. Please don't be shy to make them work for you. People have worked really hard to put those policies in place. Please don't hesitate to use them and to fall back on them when necessary. We've made this commitment. What are we doing to honor it? I think it's worth asking the question to say, well, what does that look like? You know, the piece of paper on the wall that says we value these things is great. How does that manifest in our workplace? You know, there's a question: if you were accused of being a fair workplace, how could you demonstrate it? How would you show it? What would your proof be? What would your evidence be to demonstrate it? And how real is that? And I would also encourage institutions to just recognize how much the small things matter. We have a group photo in our office, not a group photo, it's a photo of all of the heads of the organization going back to the beginning of the department. My staff call it the white man wall because that's what it is. It is a long row of sort of middle-aged white males that go down that hallway. I don't deny them their opportunity. They've all moved the organization forward. But I also wonder, what does it say to a young public servant? What does it say to folks like David when he came in as a student who walks down that hallway and sees not one single face that looks anything like himself, right? Is that you're not part of this club, you're not part of this party. So what can we do to overcome those little things that feel little and actually aren't, so that people feel welcome in the room and so that is real? I also think, you know, I see another question here that's maybe connected to this, and that's maybe how do we deal with racism in law in groups that are accused of it, law enforcement, for example. And that's one I think is important for us to tackle because it's a big piece of the Black Lives Matter movement. And how do we have that conversation? First of all, I guess I would like to say that law enforcement organizations know they have a problem. This is not news. And we have seen leaders in many, many police forces, in police unions, in justice organizations have said, listen, we know we have a problem. We know we need to do something. Some of them are a little further ahead in figuring out what to do. Others are still sort of floundering around. Everybody's sort of at a different space. There's definitely a recognition and understanding that there's a problem. One of the things that you will hear talked about is defunding the police. I'm sorry that the movement actually used that particular terminology because I think it has been greatly misunderstood. I know there's a bit of mythology that says let's fine the police to punish them for what we see as bad behavior, and that's really not it at all. The movement, the idea behind defunding the police is to talk about how do we make best use of our police services. And maybe our tech guys, if you can show that slide. I had a slide that talks about how much money we spend on policing in this country. It might be worthwhile for you to take a look. Policing is hugely expensive. And in many municipalities, it's really the only resource. And police get called for everything. They get called for lost dogs. They get called for noise complaints. They get called for mental health issues. They get called for roadkill on the side of the road. They get called for angry teenagers. They get called for crowd control. Basically, the police get called for everything. What defund the police is about looking at what do we want our police to do in our society. When you have a plumbing problem, you call a plumber. If you call a carpenter, you get a carpentry solution, right? Your carpenter comes into your bathroom, he's got a hammer, he's got a saw, he's got nails, you're going to get a carpentry solution. And the idea is that in some ways we're unfairly putting the police in that situation. So we call in a police officer who's trained in the use of force, he's trained in risk assessment, he's trained in handling violent people, he's trained in dealing with criminals, and then we go to that officer and say, okay, here, could you deal with this guy who's got a mental health issue? He's going to go in his toolbox, or she's going to go in her toolbox, and they use the tools that are available to them. What if we took some of the massive amounts of money that we spent on policing and put it into giving people alternate resources? What if you could call 911 and instead of just saying fire ambulance police, they said fire ambulance police, emergency mental health support, for example? What if you had other options? What if the police had other options when they got into this situation and said, you know, here's the situation, it's not our expertise, what can we do? There would be other resources available. Then when you had a plumbing problem, you'd get a plumbing solution. When you had a mental health problem, you get a mental health solution, and not necessarily a criminal solution. I'm aware of just a heart-wrenching case recently of a mother who called to the police and said, my son has mental health issues. I think he's out of control. We need your help. And the end result of that is a police came and he ended up being killed in the altercation. What does that mother have to live with now for the rest of her life and deal with it? What does the officer who's involved in that shooting have to deal with potentially for the rest of their career and the rest of their life? So defunding the police is about taking some of that huge budget that we spend on police and diverting it into other resources that would support the police, that would give you other alternatives. So we're not just sort of throwing good money after bad. We've recognized there are many situations where calling the police isn't the right thing to do. It's not what they're trained for. It's not what they are equipped to do. And I'm actually really uplifted to hear a number of police forces who are actually supporting that point and saying, we don't want to be called in those situations. It's not what we do. It's worth noting that we've done this before. At one point, all police officers, police forces were responsible for writing parking tickets, and they hated it. It made people dislike them. It felt like a petty use of their time. It detracted from other things that they were doing. And one by one, police forces, almost all of them across the country, just divested themselves of that. Now we have bylaw officers who deal with parking issues. We don't take highly trained police officers and, you know, have them say your meter is expired, someone else does it. What if we apply that to other social service kind of issues as well? I'm just going to take a second and just point out the chart to you that policing is the largest single expense for every single municipal budget in every major municipality anywhere in the country. So the largest single expense for every single municipality in this country is policing. And that ranges from about 8-9% in some jurisdictions up to as much, you'll see Victoria, 37% of the municipal budget overall that is going into supporting police. I will say, if you consider how much of your taxes, your property tax, you can double that number. Most cities have about half of their income that comes from municipal taxes. The rest comes from transfer payments, fines, fees, other things. So if you're actually looking at what your property taxes are paying for, you can double that amount for your jurisdiction. So for me in Edmonton, I look at it and I know 30% of my property tax is getting invested in supporting the police. Nationwide, that works out to over $8 billion that are spent on policing. It's $4.5 billion for municipal services, then another $3.5 billion that support the RCMP. They're doing such important work, and I have such profound respect for them. Maybe I'll take this moment to say my own brother is a police officer who was killed on duty. I know what kind of risks they're taking and what kind of situations that they're facing. So this isn't about punishing the police. It's about routing funds into a place where police aren't the only people that you can call. And I'll stop talking because I'm watching the time.
Thank you very much, Heather, and thank you for sharing that personal aspect of the story. I'm sorry I didn't know that, but I think we all hear what you're saying. Okay, so everyone, we've got the last few minutes here, and I'm going to throw a big one out there because I do, like Heather said, hope that a lot of the people watching today aren't just coming as people of color or Black people, but it's a bunch of people that look like me who are sitting here trying our best to learn. So the question I'm going to ask, I've been reading The Skin We're In lately, and this idea of disruption and being vocal and getting out there. How does somebody like me join this? How do I become part of it? Do I need to be invited into it? Can I just show up and say, I support? What space are we allowed to have in this? David, tu comprends ce que je veux dire comme pour moi?
David, you understand what I'm saying? How can I, as a white man, get into the space of disruption, of shaking things up?
All us white folk who really want to be part of this, please do so. Alex, do you have anything to say?
Absolutely. I was asked the same question recently. I had an opportunity to speak with the University of Ottawa men's rugby team, and they invited me. They saw a training documentary I was involved in, Lessons in Justice, and the coach called me to speak with the team. I believe there's it's a few Black people on the team, but it was a lot of Black males. White males, and that was the question that ended the session. They asked me, "What can we do?" And I saw that, and I said, "Listen, you're placed in a position of leadership, or you're a part of an organization. So there is power in that, and there's power in numbers. So if you are a person and you're not Black and you believe in these issues and you have your own sense of morality and you believe what you're seeing is wrong, then of course, you'll never be told to go somewhere else. I think the first thing you would certainly want to do is continue to educate yourself on the issues. Honestly, education is an incredible thing. And yeah, I like seeing that because the more you know about those issues, and we're all continually educating all of ourselves. I mean, I think, you heard earlier Heather talking about, she has her own biases, so do I. And what we do is that we try to gain cultural intelligence so we can get over these biases and make real decisions. So if you're a person at work and you want to have a conversation, there's no other Black people there, and they talk about Black Lives Matter, really all lives matter, or whatever they're getting into, it's okay to get in there and have that conversation and kind of state your opinion based on what you've read or what you've learned. And more importantly, if there's other Black people at work, it's okay to reach out with them. But when you do it, do it in a way that's natural. I would say do it in a way that's natural. I've been most receptive when some of my colleagues reached out to me after George Floyd. They sent me some emails and they did it in a way that was natural. And then that emails turned into a conversation, and we met virtually and we just talked. And I think it was a good moment. So Of course. And those are important because I walked away from it feeling like, good, you know what? It's nice someone cares. It's nice someone had the thought process to say, you know what, Alex, I wonder what he thinks of this because he's a black male, 6'2", 225 pounds. I could have been him too. I've been stopped by the police where I got nervous, and I'm a person that's worked with police forces for decades. I was a prosecutor for 10 years. So if I'm feeling nervous when that happens, you can imagine others. So yes, it's a conversation. You can reach out, do it in a way that's organic and natural, and I think it'll be receptive.
Thank you. David, 2 minutes. Avez-vous des pensées sur ça?
David, 2 minutes. Do you have any thoughts on this? Thank you very much, Martin, and thank you all. I have a lot of sympathy. I know that there is a lot of sympathy that people feel for the Black issue, for Black Lives Matter, but in general for the cause for that has been espoused by Black people. There's a way of dealing with this and opening up to others that is acceptable. And we want to fight injustice, but we also want to assume a responsibility. Do we want to be responsible for certain actions? Put yourself in my police, where you could be stopped rather by the police quite simply because of how you look. This is the question that I would ask of people who are not Black, who are listening to us. What would you have done if you were in my shoes when I was stopped? Thank you, David. This is very clear.
Like me, be part of this and be part of helping and be part of the solution.
What a great question to end on. I think
Excellente question.
really quickly. The first thing that you can do is you can speak up for me. I am so tired of this conversation. And like Mike, when I say tired of the conversation, I just mean I'm exhausted by the fight. When I went into the hardware store and I found someone at my elbow, watching me to see if I was stealing anything, all I thought was, you know what? Can I please just buy a package of nails and not have to confront the decay of Western society? I would just like to buy a package of nails. I don't want to be Norma Ray. I do not want to lead a parade. I would just like to go into the store and buy this package of nails. Every time that someone else can take up that issue, anytime that someone else can speak up and talk about that issue is a relief of a burden that me and people of color carry every single day, always having to be the advocate on this issue. The other piece of that is it's demoralizing to feel like you're alone when you face such an incident. I had a situation on a plane where I was traveling to South Africa. It was a long trip. I sprang for the high-end business class on the airplane. And as we were seated there, the flight attendant came over and said, I need to see your boarding pass. Because first he said, this is business class. Now I'm aware. I'm going to need to see your boarding pass. Okay, I'm already in my seat, but okay, here's my boarding pass. And then she said, I'd like to see your ID to prove that the name on your boarding pass matches the name on your ID. And I turned to the woman beside me and I said, did you get asked for your ID or am I special? Am I the only one? And I looked around and every other person was studying their fingernails and, pointedly looking away from me. And it really made me feel like I'm alone on this plane. Everyone else is okay with the fact that I am being treated differently. They don't have an issue with this. So I guess I would say just acknowledge and understand that this is not my fight. This is a fight for all Canadians who care about this issue. Driving down the road, some idiot yelled some racial thing out the window, and honestly, my head was elsewhere. I couldn't be bothered. But we stopped at a light, and there was a train going by, so it was a long light. And the woman in the car beside me, little teeny white woman, soccer mom, I'm sure, leaped out of her car, ran up to this guy's window, and started banging on the window. Come on out here and say that? Who is such a big person yelling at this? Who do you And I can't condone the road rage, but I have to say it did my heart good. She was so outraged. Got back in her car and popped out again about 5 seconds later. Nope, still mad, right? Back out yelling again. It was an uplifting moment for me. And just as I passed that spot every day on my commute to work, when I was commuting to work, I remember her, and it's a reminder to me that I'm not in it alone. So really, if you can speak up and just, not force me to always have to be the advocate and sort of leading the parade, that is a huge thing that you can do. Your voice is much, much stronger than ours. The last thing I would say, maybe this is a perfect moment to show that last image that I had, was a cartoon that I hope that people would walk away with. It's just an acknowledgement that this problem isn't my problem. And what this one says, it shows two people saying, well, good thing the hole's not at our end of the boat. We're all in this boat. And if there's anyone in our society who it's okay to treat them as less, it's okay to treat them poorly, what it means is that ultimately you're at risk as well, because it means we are going to accept that kind of unfair treatment in our society. As Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I want you to be outraged about it and to say, this is not Heather's problem or David's or Al. This is my problem, because this is not the kind of country that I want to live in. None of you and none of us are responsible for the past. We are responsible for the present and for the future. And if you're wondering, I wonder what I would have done during the civil rights movement, you're doing it now, because that's what's happening today. And this is your chance to define what your role is, just as, a generation or two before had a chance to say what their role was going to be in the 60s. Please make it a role that you'll be proud to tell your children and your grandchildren about.
Well, I'm going to end on that note. Thank you very much, Heather. Thank you, David. Merci beaucoup, David, vraiment. And thank you, Alex, for being here again. We are just so happy to have it. These are important conversations that happen. For all my fellow, non-Black colleagues who are watching, read, educate yourself, come to the school. We have learning resources. Start there, reach out to your colleagues, reach out to friends, talk to people. Don't be afraid to bring up difficult conversations. People are Black, people are white, but we should all work together for this. So on behalf of the school, I would like to thank all of the virtual participants for attending and contributing to today's events. These were important questions that were asked, and I hope the answers that our wonderful panelists provided you with help. Votre rétroaction est très importante pour nous. Ainsi,
So this is very important work that we're doing, and so I encourage you to answer the survey that you'll get over the next coming days. The school has a lot of resources to offer you for your learning, and I encourage you to go to the website to keep abreast of the news and to register for new forums in the future.
a wonderful day.
Yeah.